Hey, welcome back to the Renaissance Room podcast. And I'm going to try to make this really, really short. I'm going to try to do this podcast under 15 minutes because that's all I have is 15 minutes. But I don't want you to feel rushed. No. You relax. You settle into the moment and we're going to vibe. This work has been great. It has helped me with, I feel like great is honestly an understatement. Like having a podcast and sharing your thoughts and your ideas is probably one of the most validating, and it's the coolest experience, you know. I do feel like we have these conversations periodically, y'all know, but honestly, I feel like starting a podcast, like from the time I started it, when it wasn't this global kind of like social phenomenon, when it was really just like very individualistic to the extent of like, you started a podcast if you were a writer or a blogger, or you know what I mean? Like you had some type of news broadcasting show or commentary. You know, it wasn't like a YouTube where like you just get on and talk about anything. You know, you had people who were like in their niche, but I feel like I started a podcast when it was very much like, it was very specific. You know, you had to kind of be, I ain't gonna say kind of, but you had to be good at something and you had to come on and share your expertise within that realm. And I'm honestly happy that, I think as far as people being in the podcast space, not in a negative sense, but like looking at it from a positive sense, I'm really happy that, you know, people are starting their podcasts, especially if you're doing something that's positive, whether you're talking about food consciousness or whatever. I think it's super dope. Having a podcast is like a great experience. Like I personally would not want to quit or do it differently if I could. These days, I don't have the time for it. Honestly, my life has shifted so much. And, you know, when you have like a following and when you have people who support you, you do kind of honestly feel like you owe some sense of explanation as to why you're not doing or why you're not being, you know what I mean? Because I feel like when you have people who support you, like you want to show up for your supporters. So one of the things I want to talk about is why I decided not to talk about race anymore. And like, this isn't a matter of like, oh my gosh, like, have I leaned completely left to the liberal or conservative political views? Like, that's not really where I'm coming from. But I think one of the things that I realized for myself within our community, within the Black community, was that there is a lot of work that needs to be done within our community. And I felt like, you know, for me, one, I decided, and I've always kind of been aware of this, but I've never really been much of a talker, though I had a podcast. So, you know, for me, it was like, it's time to start doing. And I think when I start looking at the grand scheme of things, right, I finally have found a writing community over on Medium. As you guys know, I shared my column. And a lot of times I felt very validated in my experiences. But after a while, it just kind of started to feel like clickbait. You know, I started finding so many articles where race was just such this prevalent thing, where a lot of people were kind of just using it to just speak about it in this way to get views and to get likes and to really kind of be validated in their victimhood. And it just really shifted for me. And I started to really look at my writing career, like, what do I want to write about? What do I want this to be about? And how can I transmute this in a more positive light? I've always been a very positive person. I think even being aware of certain things, I think so much of race and racism is seriously just rooted in America's roots. And I don't really think that from a realistic standpoint, right? I don't want to say from a like, I wouldn't want to say from a, like, I want to be mindful when I say this. I just realized that this battle that we are fighting is not something that can really be talked about to try to stimulate some type of conversation, to try to pivot in a new direction, right? Having the conversations are cool, but I think when you sit in that space, and I noticed this within the writer communities that I was in, it just kind of becomes this really, really vicious trap and cycle that just keeps you stuck. Because you just kind of realize that like these issues will always persist. And I think one of the things that I don't really like in regards to certain communities and how we address certain things is that very seldom do we want to talk about the issues that are going on within the community. And I don't like that, because I think that that's really where that's where the conversation needs to be had. Like, how can we coexist as Black men and women? How can we coexist in a more positive and healthy way? How can we learn to have respect if it wasn't modeled to us, right? How can we learn to respect one another? How can we learn to love one another? How can, like, you know what I mean? I'm all here for the educational premise and understanding why things are. And there was a moment where I really felt allied with my brothers and sisters when I was connecting with African American literature and history and all of these different things. Like, I really felt allied. I felt like, okay, I'm seen, I'm heard, I'm feeling like there's just this profound sense of compassion. I have an understanding as to why things were the way that they were. But I remember shortly in that, I started to feel as though the immersion of African American literature was kind of becoming something like, it was kind of starting to feel more so like enablement. You know, it was more so starting to feel like enablement, because you will read the stories of our heroic figures and our community leaders and people who have done just very amazing and noble things. And you will start to feel as though this is something that is happening today when this is prehistoric. And one of the things that I was even picking up on in these old Jet magazines that I have, by the grace of God, my grandpa left me these old Jet magazines. And so it's just like, I'm so grateful. But I was picking up on just the progression and how there's always been Blacks who have been more so geared towards progression, especially after the movements, after the marches and so forth, right? Like, our ancestors were more focused on, okay, we've won the battle. We are heard. We are seen. We are showing up. We're going to be resilient, and we're going to pour into our communities, and we're going to do what needs to be done. Right. I feel like for this generation, or at least the writing communities that I've found, the conversations are always around like, okay, we cannot move forward because of this, and we still have to fight these issues. And in the midst of it, it feels very noble. It feels very, you get a sense of pride from it. You feel like you're doing something, you're doing the right thing. There's a sense of purpose, but in the long shot, it can be very dangerous, because you will find yourself looking for reasons to be upset. You'll find yourself really dealing with these emotions of rage and so forth that can easily be transmuted through the pages, and you're not really sure how to kind of navigate around that. So I think it's so important to just kind of be mindful of what you consume. You know, I think one of the things that I learned for myself, I just kind of felt like the information was not landing well. And I found myself in a space where I was like, yo, we have to take a step back. Maybe I'm not anointed in this space. So I think one of the coolest things about my podcast and me switching it to Renaissance Room and me making it about documentary and so forth was really just documenting my personal journey and like sharing the lessons that I've learned along the way. It does feel a little like crucifixion. I'm not going to lie, just because I think the world is a little unforgiving, and it could just be me personally looking at it from that perspective. I want to shift and look at it from a more positive perspective and say, yes, people are gleaning something from this. But yeah, I think that that's like a real thing. And so I think it's so important to just kind of be at this place in our lives where we realize what our ancestors fought for is the blessings that we're living in today. Right? Realize that our ancestors were very resilient, and they were very community minded, individualistic in a sense of, okay, this is me playing my role to give back to my community, and realize that we've persevered through so much, right? Realize that hate is not the answer. And I believe that the immersion of certain things and how you kind of operate within the world and so forth, it can kind of be that way. Realize that you get to choose how you live your life. Realize that you have a sense of agency over your life. I think that's another thing too, to kind of even just scratch what I just said, because I don't even think I've really landed on anything with that point. But my overall conclusion is realize you have a sense of agency over your life. Realize that you have opportunities in front of you and you should go for them. Don't ever sit in a space, whether it's, you're reading these, you're in the immersion of it and you're feeling like you're hindered. Or you're feeling like, this is what happened then, this can't happen for me now. Don't ever feel like that. Don't ever get in that space in your life. And I think that's probably one of the most dangerous things, is because I think too often the literature is taught in a way that can be enabling, in a sense of this is what it is today. You can't no, I know that there's, like I said, racism will always persist and we'll always have certain issues like this going on, but understand that there is progression and we've come so far, you know what I mean? And realize that you stay true to yourself and you operate on your moral code. For me, I'm such a loving person. I know my spirit. I know who I am. So I can't really move with like a certain type of energy because I'm just a very loving person, regardless of what it is. It's like, I'm just empathetic in that light, so if I'm going to speak something, if I'm going to share something, I have to make sure that it's educational and that it's landing well. And it's not a matter of being offensive, because I'm not really concerned about that. I'm just more so concerned about my moral code and how you know what I mean? Like, I know myself, I'm a very loving person. Like, I'm never really one to, just make people feel uncomfortable intentionally. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not me. Like, and I think for some people, it's like, okay, I don't really care. Like, you have some people who are bullies, you know what I mean? Who could just say whatever. And it's like, that's on them. But I know for me, I'm a very loving person. So I can never really violate that. Like, that goes against my spirit. That goes against what it is that I believe in. I think you can speak the truth in love. And I believe I've done that, or at least I've tried to do that. But I think that until we really kind of step back and start really fixing the issues within our community, I think the conversations, for me, I think when we talk about race and things like that, it doesn't need to go outside of that. I think that we are aware of certain things. We are aware of a system. It's not going to change. Like, I know that sounds like a very givey-uppy, like, I don't even givey-uppy. That sounds like giving up. That sounds like a very negative thing to say. But you have to realize that, like, we live in a country that was founded on that. You know what I mean? And these are systems that we cannot uproot. You know what I mean? Like, and it's not to say give up. It's just more so to say, realize that the world is the world. And like, you take your part in the world and you be courageous and you give back and you do the things that are meaningful for you. Like, you find your purpose and you find your gifts and you give that and share that with the world. You know what I mean? Like, don't get so caught up in trying to, or at least feeling like, you're making a difference by trying to fight and defeat and like spew hate and be met with all this vitriol. Cause like, it's not going to change anything. You know what I mean? But that's for you. But hey, it's different for everybody. But yeah, and so I think for me, it just violated my moral code in regards to how certain things were being said and so forth. And I also think too, everything is not for everybody. Certain things, it was a little sensitive to my spirit because, again, I'm a very loving person and I don't really move with certain prejudices and so forth. But I realized that for other people, it may be different. For somebody else, it may, hey, it may work for them in that space. But I think that there's so much freedom in picking up your crown that has been paid for. I think there's so much freedom in uplifting your community rather than, going on the opposite end of the fence and picking up your tools and your weapons and, yelling on the other side. I think that there's so much power in like loving those within your community and those around you. And I think you can get a lot further by believing that you can make a difference within your four corners, and believing that, like, or really not even believing, but more so understanding that when it comes to, your life, your light and everything, just realizing that your crown has sincerely been paid for. Your ancestors paid for this. You know what I mean? Like this right here, this is beautiful. And so I think one of the things too, I'm going to end with this because I know this is a very touchy thing. I know a lot of times it's like, these conversations are not very easy to have because I think too often it's the brain resisting change. And then I also think it's because there are real world systemic and institutional laws, regulations, issues, and racism at large that really does impact the mental health and economic status of a lot of people. But I want to say that, when you tap into yourself, like when you tap into who you are and you find that within you and like you figure out who you are and what you're here to do, you're going to realize that you're going to move with such confidence and such a force, right? Like you can call that God, whatever whatever works for you, but you're going to find that like you're unstoppable. You know what I mean? And there are no barriers except for the ones that you create for yourself, and it takes a while to get there. I'm very grateful for my journey because I really feel as though it's been such a journey. And I'm always in this space in my life where I'm like, I'll see certain people who inspire me and I'm like, I'm ready to be there, right? Like in my 30s and so forth. And I had to even just recently step back and realize like, we're going to get there. You got to chill. We got a lot to learn. And I was just sitting here thinking to myself like, wow, I've really had quite a few experiences in my life. And I'm just so grateful for that. I've always been willing to go out and put myself forward and try new things and make mistakes face and like turn around and go the other way when I realize that I am going the wrong way. And that's probably one of the biggest things that was happening for me with this writing about certain things, immersing myself in certain things is different. So anyway, I think if you can teach it, that's great. But I think, overall, realize that certain things are just for you. Like it's just for you. If you find yourself in that space where that works for you and you want to learn about certain things and it works for you. But I do think that the conversations that need to be being had are about how can we uplift those in our community? How can we love our sisters more? How can we, get out of some of the negative stereotypes that we've taken on from a societal standpoint, right? How can we work together, right? How can we overcome the crab in a barrel mentality? How can we, you know what I mean? I think that those are the conversations that we need to start having moving forward. It's not really conversations about, what another person is doing or what has been done, because I just don't think that we can ever fix a problem looking outward. So peace. That's the end of today's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. That is why I decided not to talk about race anymore, because yeah, man, it's all that. It's all of that. But we've come so far and we've persevered, and the opportunities are yours for the taking. Walk with God and know it's possible. Peace.